Shalom, shalom, shalom. Mic check, mic check. If you can hear me, put ones in the chat. If you can hear me, give me some ones in the chat. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me. Before we get started with our interview, I think it's going to be awesome. Also, we got an awesome interview coming up with Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. And I'm excited about this interview. I'm always excited about all our interviews. We've had some powerful interviews as of lately with scholars and things of that nature. So I am definitely tuned up and excited about this one because I think this one is something that that everyone in our community, if you don't have a Cepher, you probably, if you don't have a physical copy, you probably have a digital copy of the Cepher, okay? It's called the Cepher or the Cepher. So definitely excited about that. And I hope everybody else is just excited as I am about it. Definitely we're gonna open up, we're gonna have questions. We're gonna get into a lot of the conversation about the Cepher. And we're going to definitely ask Doctors Pidgeon about ask questions. I know many of you have already started asking questions about certain things, Amazon and things like that. So we're going to get into that as well. And so everybody just buckle your seatbelts, hold on, and definitely we're gonna get into we're gonna talk some doctrine stuff too. And many people don't know that that Dr. Pidgeon is also a moray, a teacher. So that's something that's we're gonna get into some of those things as well that I think is very important for us to discuss. There were several topics and things that I wanted to get into, but for the sake of time, respecting his time, and for the sake of everything, just time and things is going on, we're not going to be able to get into every single thing. So if there's just like when we had Rabbi Rosenberg and others on and whatnot, and I think we have Dr. Pidgeon, he's on here now. Hey, shalom, Dr. Pidgeon, how you doing?
Shalom, great. How are you?
Hold on, I can't hear you. You're muted on my end. Let's see here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hold on for a second. It would work if I turn my headphones on. Let's see. Let's see here. See what we got.
Oh, you got those. Oh, you got are those bows? What are the JBLs?
These are Beats. These are the Beats. So yeah, let me turn it down a little bit as well because my volume is extremely high. This is my first time using these things. My brother had given them to me, and so this is my first time trying them out on here with you. So it's extremely loud, but but it's awesome, Dr. Pidgeon. I thank you for jumping on. This is extremely exciting for everyone in the Messianic community. Many who are on here are excited. I've already started getting questions. We've had several on here. Another Rabbi Herbert Rosenberg. We've had Arabic scholars on here. Just many on here, and this is something important because I think when we start getting into the conversation about doctrine as well as the name of Yah and things like that, the Cepher has really been a blessing to a lot of people. So I don't want to rush all the way in. I want to kind of start so and build up and kind of get into that, but we want to definitely talk to you about just everything. We want to talk about who you are, your journey and things like that. I just a lot of times I don't like to just get into the meat and potatoes about things, but we want to know how a person got to where they were, to where they are, and so we kind of build up to that. So I'm gonna get give it a few minutes here. We have. Oh, let me turn this volume down. Okay, we're going to get into people are still coming in into the chat. We're also going to take a couple questions, but me personally, again, I was looking at things as far as the Cepher is concerned, but going on the YouTube channel, in our community we call Moray Teacher, you have some awesome teachings, and these are some things that I also too wanted to get into. I only have like 2 videos I'm gonna touch on, but you have some teachings on the mark of the beast 666, think dispensationalism, which is one of the videos I want to get into as well and look at, and get your whole breakdown and understanding to share with the community about those things. But it's some awesome teachings, and I'll make sure I put your YouTube channel here in the description as well, so that way many can go and check out the teachings that you have. And I love the fact that you are not politically correct. So at this time, we're just going to go ahead and get started. If you don't know who this gentleman is, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. This is my first time meeting him personally on a live. But at the same time, when you check people out, you study them, do research on them, you get a chance to know them. So I pray that the Most High would allow him to get to know me in the process, and maybe down the road, whenever his time is free, we can do a part 2 on some of the lessons. Or if it also works, maybe in the near future, some conferences or something like that, we can get him.
That would be great.
Get him in Atlanta, Georgia, because that's where I'm at. But without further ado, Dr. Pidgeon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your contacting me to be here today. I mean, I really do. It's just fantastic. I have a great love for the community, and I really want to see the community bloom and blossom. Particularly, we're in a hard time right now, a very hard time. But even in this hard time, you see that both the wheat and the tares are ripening. And as the wheat ripens, we're going to see really strong and powerful wheat. We're going to see things, a wonderful harvest glistening in the sun, and with Yahweh's blessing upon it, with grace and mercy really filled within it. And I think that really is going to make a huge difference in what happens in the world, because we're going through a real tumultuous tribulation, if you will. And this tribulation is going to be a real sorting time. But when it's all done, I believe in 2024, when this whole thing will be completed, we're going to see the outstretched arm of Yah and his hand of mercy reach again over North America. And it's going to be a wonderful thing, because the community that is now quietly forming and kind of quietly aside of everyone else. We're not looking at big buildings. We're not looking at, massive crusades and campaigns of tens of thousands. It's a different buildup. It's a different strength. It's the narrow path, and it's the stones of the temple that are being built. And as the stones of the temple are being built, what is going to emerge will be a completed temple at the end of this, and then we will be something true on behalf of Yahweh in North America. And it's going to be really, really important what happens now. So I really thank you. I thank you for asking me to be with you today and to go through this, because I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. And you know me, I like answering questions, no matter how far off the mark I may be.
Absolutely. I see you got the lumberjack going on. You told me you're in Alaska and things like that. So what is it like? How long have you been in Alaska, and what is it like to live in that part of the country?
Well, actually, I grew up here, and I was a 30-year resident here in Alaska, and I left to do, Pee-wee's Great Adventure. But when I grew up here, this was a very rugged place. I mean, very rugged. Like in the neighborhood where I lived, it stretched for about something in the range of 90 square miles, kind of like living out in Buckhead, if you will. And there was one state trooper for the whole place, and he went to bed at night. Okay. That's the way it was. And so you were really on your own. And the attitude of the police at that time was, do whatever you want, we'll pick up your body. Because the fact is that this place here is so commanding and so demanding. It is an extremely rugged environment with, it requires you to understand and respect it, because, you don't have, the weather, of course, is tremendous. Like, for instance, to give you an example, last weekend, I was preparing to go to my fellowship on Friday evening. And, my wife was cautioning me because it was going to be 8 below zero when we left, right? With a wind. And today it's going to be 51 degrees, which means that what's left of the snow will be melting off. And we're entering into, the end of winter. Up here we have 3 seasons: last winter, this winter, and next winter. And I'm just kidding, but this environment here, I mean, it's spectacular. We live in phenomenal, rugged beauty. And, but we live with the wildlife, the moose, the bear, the wolf, this kind of thing. And who, have made their presence known, and often do, right in your own front yard. And especially if you're foolish enough to leave garbage in a garbage can, And so there are rules that you have to follow. And those rules command a culture. And so it's quite a unique culture here. I love being here because I love the freedom of the place. People have to live free here in order to survive, because you have to make a spontaneous decision day in and day out how you're going to make it, Okay. And so, in Alaska, they have a saying, other states may say, well, we're this, we're that, we're the other thing. But in Alaska, it's, we'll out survive you, we'll out survive you. Like I gave an example, a huge thing happened up here last week. They established 800,000 miles of roadway in one shot.
Wow.
And that was simply by claiming the navigable waterways that the federal government was controlling. Because in the winter, all those waterways freeze up and they become snow machine roads and dog sled roads and snowcat roads. And so people use the rivers to traverse throughout the wilderness, and because they're a flat surface, right? Mm-hmm. And so once they have, a foot of ice on them, then you can go out there with your truck or your ATV or your snow machine, and away you go, visiting distant places where no man has ever been before, and where no man ever wants to go again.
So let me ask you this, Dr. Pidgeon. Do you get tired of eating salmon? I'm pretty sure the salmon there is different from the processed salmon that we eat here in Georgia. Is the taste different? And do you get tired of eating salmon? Because I know you probably just, whenever it's, I don't want any more salmon. I'm tired of seeing salmon.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I got to tell you, when I was a young fellow, this was back in 1964, my dad had run into the Athabascan Indians outside of Fairbanks, and they had a fish wheel. Now, a fish wheel is illegal for a guy like me, but for the Athabascans, totally legal. Okay. And they put it on the river, and it would scoop out the red salmon like you wouldn't believe. Well, reds, there's, you basically got 4 different kinds of salmon, and one has to distinguish between these. Okay. You have the king, and you have the red, and you have the silver, and you have the pink. Now, the pink is disdained. Well, we don't really like pink salmon. We'll eat it if you push us to it, But we don't really like, but pink salmon is actually quite good. And it's what you usually find in canned salmon because it's very plentiful. King salmon, of course, are huge. I mean, those fish would be 60 pounds or above, bigger than the screen, right? I mean, huge, massive fish. And of course, the delicacy is red salmon. Well, he found these guys, and these guys, they have a fish camp. They use a particular technique for filleting the fish. They never use this in an American supermarket, but here the Alaskan natives, the First Nations up here, they'll take the knife and they'll cut down the spine of the fish and then around the dorsal fin and around the tail, and they cut right around the edge of the tail. And then they cut right at the gills, and then they peel the meat off the rib cage, right? And then they simply slice that, and they take the tail and they flip the meat over and they hang it and let it dry. Well, there's not a bone in that. And every bit of flesh of the fish is there. There's not a bone in it. And they let it dry. Well, in this case, the Athbaskins had taken a whole batch of this and they carved it into 1-inch strips and smoked it with a little brown sugar on it. And my dad came home with 50 pounds of that smoked salmon. And they didn't like it. So I ate all 50 pounds of it over the winter, right? I had it stored away in my cupboard, and I would come home from school and I'd have 2 strips about this long every day after school. And I mean, I loved it. And to this day, I mean, you don't want to eat salmon every day. You have to break it up with some reindeer sausage and some moose hamburger, you know, this kind of thing, you know, but and they sell reindeer sausage here in the supermarket, right?
Wow.
And you can get it as hot reindeer sausage, and, you know, and reindeer is kosher. Caribou is kosher. It's a kosher food. So is moose. It's kosher. And moose meat, of course, is fantastic. I mean, there's no GMO. There's no, you know, there's no mad moose disease involved in it. It's, you know. So anyway, yeah. And of course, we live. You know, we're out here in the Mat-Su Valley, and it is, you know, it's a place that grows. You know, I mean, it grew the record cabbage 2 years ago. 158-pound cabbage.
Wow.
Came out of here. But the reason this valley is so fertile is because there's a volcano about 40 miles from here that about every 30 years covers the place in 6 inches of volcanic ash. So we have, you know, and since we've been back, we've only been back here a couple of months, but we've already gone through 2 earthquakes, both in the 5.5 area, you know.
Wow. So,
you know, you have earthquakes, you have volcanoes, you have tsunamis. You know, my brother-in-law sent me a meme. You know, here's Hurricane Irina. Here's Hurricane Katrina. In Alaska, we don't even name them. It's like 200-mile-an-hour windstorm coming through today. Okay, all right, kid. We won't go outside.
So let me ask you this, Dr. Let's kind of transition a little bit, kind of get into it. Who is Dr. Stephen Pidgeon? How did you come into? What is your field of study? What is your area? What is your discipline? All of that. Just go ahead and lay it out.
No, Maury, I'll tell you, you know, you're really, you know, you're the first one who really has asked that question. Who is this guy, right? And I'll tell you, you know, I just want to express my love to you for asking this question, okay, brother? Because, you know, I mean, I can tell you, I'm not quite sure. I wasn't quite sure who I am, you know. But I think, you know, Yah has pointed out to me. He says, you know, Ani kol goyim. I am every nation. And I really am. You know, when I've done all my ancestry research, my DNA research and all this, and I've come to conclude that most likely that we were gypsies on both sides of the family, on my father's side and on my mother's side. But I'm a weird duck in my family. I mean, nobody in my family was over 6 feet ever.
Wow.
You know, my dad was 5'8", my mom was 5'5", and all of a sudden I show up, I'm almost 6'3". I was like, my dad's looking at me like, where did you come from? You know, I'm like, well, you know, Dad, I'll tell you, I don't know, but you know, I think Yah had intended me to live, and because I'll tell you, there were so many times I should have been dead. I mean, it's just the truth of it. Particularly growing up here, I should have been dead so many times, and Yah would preserve me, and He would preserve me, and He would preserve me, and everything. I don't know why you're preserving me. Anyway, but because this environment is so harsh, I mean, I lost a ton of friends when I was a teenager. I went to 18 funerals.
Wow.
And the 18th funeral I went to was when I was 21, which was the death of my sister, who died at 23. She died in a car wreck. And that one was the last funeral for me that was really, I mean, just overwhelming, because at that point, you know, when the funerals keep coming in like that, you know, pretty soon you have an expectation, who's next to die, right? And you have this, and the adrenaline that comes in, the adrenaline of tragedy and grief that comes roaring into your body, you know, when it happens. You know, I had an expectation it was going to be back, right? And of course, when my sister died, it was extremely tragic for the whole family. I mean, it just wiped out my mother for 50 years, you know. And anyway, we had, so it was a grave difficulty. And what had happened was, you know, my sister and I, we were musicians, right? And my mother became a professional musician when she was 11. Her father was a professional musician at age 12. And it went all the way back, you know, to the early 1700s. We've been able to trace our musician history. And I personally think the history goes all the way back to the temple, you know, as the family of Asaph. And anyway, but this musicianship was always present. And so we started working as professional musicians very young. And we had been on the road. We were touring out of Atlanta, actually. And we used to play, you know, we used to play the Atlanta Underground. And we played clubs like Hotlanta and Richards and at the electric ballroom down on, well, the electric ballroom was down on, on Piedmont and, well, whatever. Anyway, down by the, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, but we were doing all this, and then my sister and I, we came back to Alaska, and my sister, you know, we like to play a lot of music, and we always played with a diverse group. You know, I mean, I always played with Black musicians from the time I was 14 years old, and Jewish musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so my sister went down, and she was jamming at a club called the Black Orchid, and they loved her. And she was a flute player and a singer, right? And she was in it and she's jamming, and they're like, man, you know, you're playing some really good stuff. Well, there was a keyboard player that played Hammond, right? And he says, you know, I really like you coming in here Saturday nights and just, you know, blowing the doors down, but why don't you come with me tomorrow morning and jam? And she says, well, where are you going tomorrow morning? He says, well, you know, I play Hammond at this church. Why don't you come in and play flute for us? Well, she went into this church. Well, it wasn't just any church. It was Black gospel. You know, and I don't know if you've ever been to one of those churches, man, but I'll tell you, they're some of my favorite places on earth. I love that music, man. And I love the way people sing it, and I love the way they play it, you know, and I love the musicianship, man. It's such a high level, right?
Right.
But she's playing there. Well, sure enough, she confesses a faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
She confesses a faith. And so she comes home and she's just bouncing off the ceiling. She says, I'm born again and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and she was my older sister. I'm like, wow, Louise, this is fantastic, you know, and I'm thinking, this is a path of glory for us, you know, for all of us, right? Louise has opened the door, I can follow her in, right? And 3 weeks later, she was dead.
Oh, man.
And for me, and that was my 18th funeral. And so I fell into this trauma that was so intense. I mean, literally the PTSD finally got me. Mm-hmm. And so I went into what they call pathological anxiety. I mean, just to be frank with you, I used to wake up in the middle of the night screaming, you know, and that went on for years and years and years. But there came a point, and so I became convinced in my mind, if I confess him, I'll be dead in 3 weeks, right? That was in my bone marrow, right? Wow. And so I'm arguing with Yah, and I'm like, you know, and then pretty soon this war starts up between Yah and Satan. I mean, and Satan was just like all over me. It's like, man, all you got to confess me, I'll make it happen for you. I'll make it happen for you. Confess me. And he would be standing right at my back, right here, while I'm practicing the piano, you know, telling me. And I'd be screaming at him, get out of here, get out, you know. And anyway, this war went on for years. And I'm telling Yah the whole time, leave me out of your war. Go fight over somebody else. Just let me die. When I die, I'll just go into the dark black, and that'll be the end of it. And what I didn't know, a friend of mine pointed this out to me, Yah was warring over my grave.
Wow.
He was warring over my grave. And finally, there came a day where I went into a nervous breakdown, and I finally confessed to him. I said, you know, and I started to pray. And 15 minutes later, there was somebody at the door with a Bible in 15 minutes. And it was the first Bible I'd ever seen. And I looked at this Bible. It was Jehovah's Witness Bible, the little green one. You know? Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and went, okay, this is interesting. So I'm kind of reading through it and kind of getting a handle on it. And I had some real questions about it. But nonetheless, I knew that Yah had heard my prayer. He heard my prayer. And so he starts pulling me out of the abyss, man. I mean, I'm down in the pit, man. I mean, I'm laying on the side dirt of Sheol right there, right? Covered in mud, covered in filth. And he's like, you know, I recall you. I know you. And come on. And he starts pulling me out of the pit. even though he'd rescued me, he'd saved my life at least 3 times at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts pulling me out of the pit. And so I knew he was real. I knew he was genuine. And so it took years, though, for me to come to understand Mashiach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Years. But it really happened. There came a point about halfway in this journey where I said, okay, look, my plans are over. I'm not making my plans anymore. I've done it. My plans are a complete failure. I'm taking my plans. I'm giving them to you. Here you go. You take them. I'm out of here. And he said, okay, I'll take them. And so he completely changed my life. Just like the instant I gave my plans over to him, he changed my life. Just boom, boom,
Wow.
boom, boom. He put me back in college. I ended up getting a degree. I ended up going to law school, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff, just bam, bam, bam. I'm like, okay, now going to law school was not really my preference, although it was my heart's desire from a child to do that. But he decided he wanted me to go to law school because he wanted me to have the understanding of reading the words for what they mean and seeing these words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was an extremely important point. So law school is not a path for anyone to understand Torah or to understand scripture. But when I started reading these law books, I had the opportunity to read R.J. Rushdoony's Institutes of Biblical Law and to read John Calvin's Institutes of Christianity, and to start reading other literature, right? And as I'm reading this other literature, I'm going, okay, well, this is very interesting stuff. So, I became an avid reader, and you know what they say: if you will find me, seek me with all your heart, and you will find me.
Mm-hmm.
If you seek me with all your heart. And so I began to seek him. I began to seek him in earnest, And there came a point where I realized that the Son, that the Word made flesh, was real and living, and this was with whom I was communicating. And so finally, there came a point where I sat down. I went into a church, walked into this church. There was no one there. Church was unlocked. There was no one there. I was the only one in the church. And that church would hold about 450 people. Mm. And I walked in there and I sat down and I started to pray. And, I see Mashiach for the first time. And he's across the room and he's coming at me and he looks at me and he says, welcome, welcome. But he looked at me with total discernment. I know everything about you. Mm. Everything. I know everything there is to know about you. And you have confessed me. And my statement to you is, welcome, welcome. Now, I was praying to him last night. I said, Yahusha, you have said that none will be snatched from your hand.
That's right.
None will be snatched from your hand. Let this be true. Let this be true. That none who have confessed your name are snatched from your hand. And anyway, so this began my journey. Now, as my journey began, I was a weekend Christian, right? I'm holy on the weekend. I'm holy on the weekend, right? Monday morning, I'm busy working in the law office, helping crooks steal money from innocent people. Right?
Oh, man.
And defending them in court, right? Yeah, my client took a lot of money from a lot of innocent people, but they knew what they were doing, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, there came a point where I realized, look, I'm defending the wicked against the innocent. And this is, I can't be a sinner on the weekday and a faith person on the weekend. Mm-hmm. So I began to read more and more. And there were some things that came to me. Of course, I had a ton of questions. And there were some things that came to me. And one of the things that came to me, I was reading the book of Jubilees one day. And I was reading Jubilees, and I'm going, man, this answers all these questions. Look at this. Boom, boom, boom. And I'm looking at it, wow, 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 wow. All these questions I didn't know had an answer. And here's all the answers right here. And I couldn't believe it. So I took this green binder. This was in the 90s. I took this green binder and I started hole punching, printing out these books, hole punching and putting them in my green binder because I wanted my own scripture. Mm-hmm. And, and then I found the book of 4 Ezra or, 2 Esdras. Yeah. And I read 2 Esdras and I went, and I was just screaming. I was just so remarkable. I just love this book so much. How come this thing where is it? How come it's so obscure? And I hole punched it and I put it in my binder, And so anyway, I kept collecting these books. Well, then I bought I think it was 98, I bought the Oxford Complete Bible. Now the Oxford Complete Bible, what I didn't know, it's the Benjamin Blaney 1789 edition of the complete KJV with the Apocrypha. Mm-hmm. And so I'm reading the Apocrypha. It's like Sirach, what? Tobit? What are these books, right? I hadn't seen these before. I had an NIV and an NIV study Bible and an NKJV, and all of a sudden I'm reading these books and going, okay, well, Oxford, this is an Oxford book. Seems legit, And, so I went to this pastor. I said, what about these books? What about, Tobit? What about, the Wisdom of Solomon? I mean, is that legit? And he starts quoting me from these books. And I said, oh, okay. And he was a former Brit, So you've read these books. Okay. So anyway, then of course we're doing Bible studies. And as we're doing Bible studies, I'm getting farther and farther in it. Now, the big change in my life happened in 2002. And I was invited to go on a mission trip into Russia. And I'm thinking, okay, Russia, right. Yeah, okay. I mean, I grew up in Alaska. I'm familiar with that environment, right? And so we go into Russia, and I had no idea. I mean, I knew like Das Vidanya, I think. Anyway, we get to Russia, and we left Moscow, and we went down to this little town called Kursk. And we get down to Kursk, and we're going to minister down there. Well, guess who met me in Kursk? The Ruach HaKodesh. That's who met me in Kursk. And the Ruach is like, oh, okay, so you're going to toss your life into my hands. And I'm like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. I'm tossing my life into your hands. You lead, because I already know what my plans look like. Show me what your plans look like. Right, and so, right. Boom, I am baptized in the Ruach HaKodesh.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, this is phenomenal. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was just like bouncing off the ceiling. It's like, this is outrageous. This is unbelievable. This is incredible, And I'm telling you, listen, I was on such a high from that trip. All I wanted to do was go back to Russia because I believed in my heart. That's where the Ruach HaKodesh is, right? It's not anywhere else. He's over there. I have to go over there to find this Ruach, So anyway, I made 4 trips into Russia, and there were miracles that happened there, and there was blessing that happened there. And, of course, I mean, like when you get into Moscow, man, Moscow is a dangerous city. I mean, big time dangerous. Multiply Atlanta by 4, right?
Wow.
And so you got to be very careful about what you're doing in Moscow. And, and so I was able, pretty soon I started picking up the Russian language, and I'm able to negotiate my way around it. So I could give you an example of my second trip there. I could read the subway signs, right? Mm-hmm. And I had an idea of how Moscow was laid out. So I told the team, I said, look, I'm going to this place today, and I don't know if you guys want to go or not, but that's where I'm going. Well, where are you going? I'm going to the Novodevichi monastery. You're going to Novodevichi. How do you know where that is? I said, we just take the Arbat subway and we go out this line. And go, okay, we'll go with you. Okay, great, we go. So we go out to this Novodevichi cemetery. And when we get out there, we find a graveyard. And so it cost us 10 rubles, to get in there. 10 rubles is about, 75 cents, something like that. Okay. To get into this graveyard, so we paid the 10 rubles, we go in, and we're walking through this Russian graveyard. Well, this was sacred ground, right? And here we find the grave of Nikita Khrushchev. I'm thinking, Nikita Khrushchev, Soviet leader buried on sacred ground. Didn't want to be buried in the Kremlin wall. So here you have a believer. He was an Orthodox believer who died, and they buried him on sacred ground. Now, when I discovered Russia, man, it was like, hey, look at this. Look at all these churches. Mm-hmm. Well, it turned out that Moscow had the largest number of churches of any city in the world. Wow. These people were an extremely religious people. So I began to ask, why 70 years of atheism? Why did this happen, right? And when I began to ask that question, Yah began to give me the answer. And so here I am in Russia, and Yuri Mikhailovich, he says, I told him, I said, I'm going to teach at the morning session one morning. He says, okay, fine, you can do that. So I taught on this passage out of the Gospel of John. In the Russian, it's «Я на том родился и на том пришел в мир, чтобы свидетельствовать во истине. Всякий, кто от истины слушает гласа моего». For this reason I was born, and for this reason I came to the earth, to testify to the truth. All those who are of the truth hear my voice, right? And so I began to teach this Russian study. I said, можно вам задать вопрос? Yes, два вопроса, пожалуйста. Что есть истина? Что есть freedom? What is truth? What is freedom? Что есть свободно? So anyway, I get to teaching this. Well, guess what? When you start teaching about Yahusha delivering the truth, right? It was for this reason I was born. This reason I came to earth, to testify to the truth. Those who are of me hear my voice. Those who are, who love the truth. Well, the truth is everything. You can take an atheist who says, I did that church thing, can't stand it, not going back there, blah, blah, blah. I've seen the religious people. But if that person loves the truth, they will find Yah. Mm-hmm. They'll find him because he is the truth. And if you love it and you seek it, you don't know that's who you're seeking, but he is the way, the truth, and the life. And if you seek truth, you're going to find him. And so this is what happened with me. So I started teaching on the truth. And the next thing, I'm teaching at all these churches and I do these big conferences. And it's like, okay, all right, well, I don't know how this happened, but whatever, I'll keep going if y'all wants me to do it. Well, I went to this one church and the guy says, look, I want to do a Bible study with you. And I said, well, look, I'm in 3 Bible studies right now, but I'll do a Bible study with you on one condition. He says, what's the condition? I said, we read the Bible. We don't read these New Age pamphlets that have one verse in it from the Bible, right? Here's our verse. And now this is a Bible study. No. I said, we're going to do a Bible study. We're reading the Bible. And
man.
So they agreed, right? Well, that Bible study turned out to be the most exciting place I think I've ever been, ever. In Russ's basement, right? So we started out with 6 people. And at the first year, we had 34 people at Pesach. The next year, we had 60 something. The year after that, we had 104. And when we started studying the Bible, man, we started going, look at this, man, look at these words. As one friend said, we're actually reading from that section where the gold leaf is still stuck together. And anyway, there came a point where Thursday night became the most exciting night on earth. I mean, we were just bouncing off the ceiling. We get started at 6, we'd be there till midnight. And everybody was just, yes, wow, unbelievable. These kinds of things that were happening, right? And so anyway, I'm sitting at the Bible study and I'm talking with Brad at the Bible study. And we got this news release that somebody was going to release a politically corrected Bible that was going to take out all the toxic masculinity and dumb down the phrases and make it a much more sweet and kind and palatable and washed out scripture. And I looked at Brad, I said, Brad, that is intolerable. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, we need to do just the opposite. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to create a Bible that's the most difficult thing you've ever read. Let's just put the pedal right down to the metal. No political correctness whatsoever. Just drop it where it is. I said, you want to do it? He says, yeah, okay, I want to do it. So we were going to print Bibles for our fellowship. That was it. That was what the objective was, to print Bibles for the fellowship. So we started compiling work, right? And as we started compiling work, we were making mistakes like you wouldn't believe. Well, let's try this. So we tried publishing it in 3 books initially. That didn't work. Then, okay, well, let's put it together in 2 books. Then we found a way to publish it in 1 book, right? So that's what we ended up with, the 87 books. And we wrestled over the book of Jasher. I mean, we wrestled for 2 years over the book of Jasher. Should we include? And then we got to the point, I said, Brad, look, these names have to be transliterated. We're not, we were making trips into Israel, and it's like, when we talked to the rabbis, they'd be talking about Tehillim and Yechezkel. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right? And these guys were like, well, okay, well, you call it the book of Psalms, okay? And I'm thinking, okay, all right. So we bought some Tanakhs, we're looking through the Tanakh. And of course, we got the Delitzsch New Testament, the Hebrew Delitzsch New Testament. And so we're looking through these, we're going, okay, this is cool. This is really great, and we're doing all this research. And as we're doing the research, the Ruach was really just on us. It's like this. Well, then there came the question of what do we do with the Tetragrammaton, right? Yod He Vav He. Mm-hmm. And so, well, I think it's this. Well, let's go look. Let's go to Israel and see what the common usage is, right? Well, what? Have you been to Israel?
I haven't. The COVID messed my trip up.
Oh, man. Well, I'll tell you, and it's messing everybody's trip up, particularly those people who live in Israel right now.
Yeah.
But when you're in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is, the map looks quite a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't care how long you live there. You're not finding your way around with that GPS, man. That town is a mess. and everything looks the same. And then they have these street signs that are about this big, right?
Right.
And they're not on a street pole on the corner. They're on the corner building, right? So they're on the corner of the building over there, and there's a little gold plaque, you know, and it's in Hebrew, and it's in English, and it's in Arabic. But the English name is smaller than the Hebrew name, right?
Right.
And so anyway, so we're looking at these street names. Well, here are these street names, you know, Yirmiyahu, Yishayahu, right? They're like, what is this? Zakaryahu, Obadyahu. We're looking at these names like, what's this Yahoo thing? And so I'm looking at the Hebrew spelling, right? And so where the Yahoo is, you have this Yod He Vav in every case. And Yirmiyahu, on Yishayahu, on Obadyahu, on Zakaryahu. The Yahoo is spelled Yod He Vav, right? So then we're looking at the common street signs, and everywhere that you would find the Vav in the middle of the word, it would either be pronounced U or O. So for instance, like when you look at Torah, right?
Right.
Torah, this idea of Tav, Vav, Resh, He, Torah, or some people say Torah, and Torah would be accurate too, but Torah. Same thing with Shalom, right? This Shin, Lamed, Vav, Mem, Sufi, right? So you don't say Shalovam,
right?
You don't say Tevorah, right? But you know, Nehemiah Gordon, who's a great guy, he kept saying Yehovah, Yehovah, Yehovah. And it's like, nope, that ain't right. That's not right, because that Vav is not going to be pronounced as a V inside the word. It's going to be pronounced as an U or O.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so I became more and more convinced. Then we began the study of the Paleo-Hebrew. And as we began studying Paleo-Hebrew, you know, Paleo-Hebrew has what's called the Tedushah. That is, each word has its own intrinsic meaning. And if you know the Tedushah of Paleo-Hebrew, you can determine what a Hebrew word means by looking at its Tedushah, looking at its intrinsic meaning, right? And, you know, so the Aleph has a certain meaning, meaning the ox head, or the spiritual head, the you know, ultimate head of authority. Beit means the tent or the house, right? Gimel is the camel's foot. Dalet is the door, right? Mem is the water. But Mem also has a different meaning, right? The open Mem means the womb,
right?
A mother's womb. And the closed Mem means the virgin womb, you know? And so when you look at when you look at the word Miriam, you have Mem, Resh, Yod, Mem. Anyway, I'm not going to get too far into it, but suffice it to say that having spent doing 3 trips into Israel and looking at the common usage, we determined that the correct pronunciation was Yahuwah.
Yahuwah.
Yeah. And so as we did that, we began praying about it, and we began to publish in that name.
Okay.
And then, of course, this was reiterated by Josephus in Wars, in Book 5, Chapter 5, Paragraph 7. It says that the Levite priest, and Josephus was the last eyewitness to the speaking of Hebrew. And he said that the priest, the Levite priest, had an ephod with the tetragrammaton on it, the Yod He Vav He, that they pronounced as 4 vowels. Now that's interesting, 4 vowels, because when you see 4 vowels, the Masoretic teaching today is that there are no vowels in the Hebrew language.
Right.
Well, there may be no vowels in the Masoretic expression, but there most certainly are vowels in the Paleo expression. And those vowels would place Yod as E, He as A, Vav as U or O, and He as A, E, A, U, A, Yahuwah, Yahuwah, Yahuwah. And we spelled it Yahuwah in the text. Now, a lot of people say Yahuwah and other things, which is okay. But what we do know is this, is that we know. Now, look, have you seen this guy who is claiming to be the Messiah in Israel?
You know what? I was going to get into that. You just go ahead, Dr. Pidgeon. I was going to kind of, you know, build up to that. We in it now. Go ahead. We all the way in it now.
Well, we can get to that. We can get to that. The point I want to make with him is that the last part of his name is Iyahu. Iyahu, right? That's how he spells it. I-A-U, I-A-U, Iyahu, Yahu, right. Like Yahoo, right? And they pronounce it Jizzy Yahoo. Yeah. But it's Iyahu. Yahoo, right? And which his real name is Shlomo, by the way, but that's another story.
Right.
But but the thing is that this distinguishment. So as we got into, so for me, here you have me who was pulled out of the pit by Yah, and he pulled me out of the pit. He pulled me out of death. He pulled me out of certain death. He pulled me out of the pit, and he put me on a path of correction that was laborious, long, slow. The truth is, I'm a slow learner. I'm a slow burner. Like, yeah, right. You what? You want me to wake up? I'm almost there. Another couple of years, I'll get there. Right. And and then eventually, I also pursued a PhD in political science, and I have done other studies as well. I mean, I'm currently studying with Hebrew University just to give the Masoretic guys a hard time, and and my field of study has really been very, very broad. I've worked, like to give you an example, I worked as an executive in biotech and biopharma and biomed. I was an executive in that area. I was an executive in telecom. I formed a telecom company when I was in law school, and we ended up flipping that telecom company to some of the bigger boys. And so I knew quite a bit about bandwidth, and we were in tower acquisition for a while, but mostly we were in acquiring licenses for bandwidth. And that was in the days before we got into what is now 5G. I mean, in fact, it was before 4G. We were dealing with, early bandwidth was what they called narrow band, which is between 800 megahertz and 1200 megahertz. And then we got into broadband, which was between 1.2 gigahertz and 2.5 gigahertz. And then it expanded up into another level that Apple had actually perfected it, that allowed transmission 3G at 5.6 gigahertz. I was working with the guys who built out all the wireless telecom in Europe under a GSM system. And I knew some of the guys who were working with the CDMA products, working out of Southern California and in China. And so I did a lot of that stuff. I did a lot of technology stuff, and I was involved in a lot of software development and hardware development. And I did a lot of stuff in biotech and biomed, biopharma. And anyway, but I would look at all this stuff and go, okay, well, all this stuff is great. And then at one point we found a technology, and I got to tell you, Maria, this stuff was hot, right? Because you have a big problem with bandwidth, right? Now, if you want to talk about air pollution, we can't see the frequency of a cell phone, right? You can't see it.
Right.
Imagine if you could see it.
Oh, man.
What would Atlanta look like? Huh?
It'll be crazy, man.
You wouldn't be able to see the buildings. You wouldn't be able to see your way down the freeway. If you could see it, you wouldn't be able to drive, right?
Right.
Just that line of radio wave coming out, right? Now, well, there was we had looked at bandwidth that was being done by infrared light, okay, using lasers. And we worked with this professor out of Germany who had developed a means of amplifying light. Believe me, that's a trick into itself. That's a real science. And so we had these machines that had 4 lenses, and they would broadcast using laser light, and there would be 4 receiving lenses at the other end. So they would be stacked at an angle, right? So you had actually 8 lenses on each camera, and they could broadcast 3 miles, and you would have 4 broadcasting at the same time in order to create redundancy. So in case it rained, it would break the signal, right? And the bandwidth out of these things was unbelievable. It was something like 2,000 DSLs in one can. And so anyway, I started developing a business plan around developing this bandwidth for inner city use, right? Because you could put these up inside buildings, shooting to one another. Nobody would see it because they're infrared light, right? So it's completely out of sight, and it would be broadcasting unprecedented bandwidth. Well, as soon as I built the business plan, a guy from AT&T Wireless got drifted the business plan. He promptly lifted the business plan, all the technology, started a company with a $40 million investment from Lucent Technologies, and then drove the technology right into the ground and walked up with an $18 million golden parachute, right?
Wow.
And so I'm looking at this, and I'm going, okay, so any idea you do in the world right now in the United States is going to be stolen. I mean, I'm telling you, if you let an idea come out of your mouth, that's a good idea, okay? If somebody in California hears about it, they'll have a business plan and have it funded before you can say, I shouldn't have said that.
Wow.
Right. So I'm looking at this and well, these guys are all thieves, right? They have no respect for intellectual property whatsoever. They just steal anything blind. And I was working with a bunch of Microsofties and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something that these guys have absolutely no interest in stealing. Scripture. Let's see if they want to steal that. Right. And they didn't. It was like, oh man, we don't even want to be around you. Yeah, great. That's exactly where I wanted to be. So Yah, protected us. He immediately protected us. He said, okay, well, look. So anyway, we're working this project. We're trying to get this book better and better and better and stop making mistakes. Mm-hmm. That's the key. Stop making mistakes and let's see if we can get a book that looks good and that's good. So we went to this one printer that was so bad, man. This printer was so horrible. You get about 3 reads to the book and the book would just completely fall apart, right? Like, hey, that's not going to work. And it was costing us $45 a book to print. It's like, this book is a piece of junk. What is going on here? And then at one point we ordered 4 books and they sent 3 of them. Then the 4th one had the cover upside down. So I'm looking at this and go, okay, these guys are horrible, right? So I went downtown. I figured, okay, this one's got the cover upside down. I want to give this book to my nephew and I'm going to go see if I can get it covered in leather, So we go downtown and we talk to this guy and this guy, yeah, I can cover that in leather for you. And it was $200 to cover it in leather. I said, well, great. I want you to do it because I want to give this to my nephew. He says, okay. And then he's looking at books like, who printed this pile of junk? I mean, look at this. I mean, you expect me to repair this? I mean, look at that. And I'm like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, man. It's horrible. And he says, okay, look. He says, I'm going to tell you, here's who you go to. And he recommended this printer. And so we're thinking about this printer. We're talking to these guys, and we had come to a point where we had reached the final recreation of the book. We finally got to the point like, okay, it's here. This is the 8th edition, became the 1st edition of the Cepher. And we found these guys are like, this book is too big. If you put 8 more pages on here, we can't print it. We can print it right here, but we can't print it with 8 more pages. Okay, all right. So we reduced the margins in the header and we did a bunch of other stuff to try to scrunch it in so we could get it into that many pages. And that was the 1st edition of the Cepher. Now, since then, Yah has been, now you got to remember that we were working 40 to 50 hours a week on this project. Mm. And we did that for 6 years. Okay, there was nothing coming back in. And so we were, we just did it because this is what Yah called us to do. Yeah. And our initial print, the idea was to print for our friends and family, our fellowship, so that we would have good quality books that we could read, right? Well, the book started becoming popular and David and Penny got involved and they started properly stewarding the company and they have been doing a great job stewarding the company. But now we've gotten to a point now where I have to tell you, I continue. In fact, I'm working on polishing up the next edition right now. I work full time on this stuff. I completely rewrote the entirety of the text 2 years ago. It took me a year, and I bounced out a trial format of 100 book format in Scripture. And I have since looked at it and said, no, we're not going to the 100. And Yah told me, when we did, I don't know if you've seen our other books. Have you seen our other books like Havod and Bereshith, Shemaim and all those?
I saw some of the, I saw, I think it was the Better Sheet on Amazon. I think if I'm not mistaken, it was another book outside of the Cepher that I saw that was out there, but I haven't seen any of the other ones.
Well, Amazon has really Amazon tried to kill us last year.
Oh, yes.
Some
people asked about that too in the comments. So we're gonna ask, I guess since we're here now. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, somebody put up the Cepher for $14,000.
Yes, I saw an $8,000 Cepher.
Get out of Dodge here. That is so ridiculous. And the fact is, we're not, that wasn't us. Okay.
Okay, cool, good, great.
But that's what Amazon did. It's like, okay, yeah, you want Cepher, $8,000, right? Well, that's crazy. And that's not what the condition is. But we have our own, at Cepher.net, we have a collection called Dr. P's Library, right? Dr. P's Library. And we have a set of books in there, like the Lexicon, Shemaim, Havot, Bereshith, Josephus Antiquities, Josephus Wars, and we're adding to that collection all the time. That collection is going to continue to expand this year. I'm hoping pretty dramatically that we're going to add to it. We've got some really good books planned to come out in that series. But with Havot, Havot is such an explosive book, and it's a beautiful thing, right? This was, Havot means the fathers, right? And this was, we call the book Havot because it's the writing of people who were called the fathers of the church in the first century. So we have Irenaeus, we have Clement, we have Barnabas, the Epistle of Barnabas in there.
Mm-hmm.
Importantly, very importantly, we have the Vision of Paul in there, which is a terrific book. We have the Ascents of James, and I'm telling you, that is the most authoritative first century book in existence. That the Ascent.
Now, is this are all of these books available on Cepher.net? I just put the site in the chat. We have about 80 people in the chat right now. So I put Cepher.net in there, so that way somebody said I went to the website and it was $100. I don't know if that's the Cepher.
That's right. It's 95. Okay. The Cepher is 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're going to buy it, do yourself a favor and buy it with the tabs. With the tabs installed. Don't buy it with the tabs that you're going to do it. I had a friend of mine, he bought the tabs, he bought the book and he bought the tabs for his own installation. And he says, can you help me with this? And he had the tabs on there, cattywampus in the wrong place with big, fingerprint stains and stuff on it. But just buy it with the tabs installed. There are people out in our community that, that's how they make their living, is installing the tabs, So you'll bless them if you have them install the tabs. And you can get the package deal. If you buy the package deal you get the tabs and you get the case, well, then guess what? You get free shipping, and it comes out FedEx. That's free FedEx, right?
Now, and is that the one with the book? I think it was the one you were talking about, James.
The Ascents of James.
Ascents of James. Okay, definitely.
That's in the book called Havot. That's a collection of writings.
It's a collection of writings. Okay.
Yeah. So it opens with the Didache, which is kind of rules of the community that were expressed in the first century. And then it's got the visions of Paul. It's got the Apocalypse of Peter. It has the Gospel of Nicodemus. Oh, interesting book. And originally called the Acts of Pontius Pilate. Mm-hmm. The Gospel of Nicodemus. It's got the Gospel of Mary in it. No, but when I was praying, I was putting this book together. And this book is a wonderful book. It also has the Shepherd of Hermas. It's got the 3 books of the Shepherd of Hermas, right? Which is the commands and the similitudes and the visions. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, those are worth reading. But when I'm looking at this book, I'm like, okay, yeah, fantastic. We should add this to the Cepher. And Yah's like, nope. And I said, well, how about if we just take and we add this to the New Testament and we publish it like that? He says, if you do that, you will create idolatry.
Wow.
You will create idolatry because they will never look at the Old Testament again. You will create idolatry if you do that. And I said, okay, all right. So this is why, you have to listen to Yah. You have to listen to Yah in his correction, because let me tell you, you want to go contrary to the will of Yah when you're doing this kind of thing? Okay. You better not be outside the lightning storm. That's all I can tell you, because I'll tell you, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. And this is the truth of the matter. So anyway, so that's the history of the Cepher. And so the Cepher now, we're on 3ER2, and we just recently published a collector's edition, which is going to be a massive, huge book. It's 12.5 by 8.5, 3 inches thick, 14-point font, Millennium edition of the Cepher.
Oh, man.
And, yeah, that thing is beautiful. It's a lot of money, but it's beautiful. It's costing us a fortune. We had to print it in Britain, right? It was the only place that had a printing press big enough to do it. And so we printed it in Beccles in England. And the guys over there looked at me and said, brilliant, yeah, quiet, well, let's do it. So anyway, I love those guys. I love the Brits. They're fantastic people. But so that's what we did. So anyway, and of course we have the app for the phone. You can get it on your Android and it's just recently been updated on Droid and on iOS and on Apple. And so the app is smoking. It's got a great search engine in it built. It's got the lexicon built in it. And so it's really quite effective, and it resides in your phone. You don't have to be online. You go to church and be offline and pull it up and read the text. and it gives you a chance. You know how everybody in church nowadays got their phone out, right?
Yeah.
We don't need Bibles here. I use my phone. Yes, Pastor, I use my phone while they're surfing email, you know.
Yeah. So, Dr. Pidgeon, I know, again, I want to say earlier to everybody who just now tuning in, we are, if you don't know by now, which I'm pretty sure you are, we are talking to the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Cepher Publishing, the Cepher Publishing Group, and Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. So I want to, again, as I said earlier, I myself, I kind of had for a period a little, as people say, controversy or controversial, but on the other hand, you don't shy away from controversy, so you may have me by a few feet there with that, but I want to play a small clip of something that has circulated throughout the community of you, and I think it may bring a little controversy, and probably has brought controversy to the more of the evangelicals and those with this particular. It's a really short clip, and I'm going to share it here for everyone to see it.
This was pre-beard, right? Pre-beard clip.
Yeah, this was pre-beard. But you had a nice goatee going on, and you had your frames, and it was cool. It was cool. So here we are. If you're able to see my screen here, you should be.
Yeah,
able
let
to
it rip.
It. Okay, so I'm going to play this, and let's see here.
I knew these words would come back to haunt me here.
You probably know it. You probably know what this is. So let's we're gonna get into it right here. Hold on, let me make sure that I did this properly. Okay, yes, I did. All right. So let's go here.
The Nazis, of course, expanded on Margaret Sanger's approach to eugenics, right? Eugenics was a movement that was born in the United States under hard doctrines of racism with the intent of eliminating the tribe of Judah in the African-American community in this country, right? To eliminate them. That's why she formed Planned Parenthood, was specifically to kill African-American, Black.
Now, see, this is what I'm saying, Dr. Pidgeon. See, for me, I might have to take a couple of months to process this before I just let it rip. But I guess if they want to come see you, they got to come to Alaska and get through all the forest and all the wolves and everything like that. Me, I'm in the city. They can find me, but they come find you. They got to go through a feat of mountain terrain, wolves, mooses, and all that type of stuff. So what, when you made this statement, and I'm pretty sure you probably knew that this would come back, especially the day in which we live. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people, dealing with the identity and the heritage, as well as returning back to Torah and keeping the moeds and the feasts and the Shabbat and things like that. When you made the statement about killing off the tribe of Judah and African Americans, what after you said it, did you just say, what did I just say? Or did you say it like, nope. Hey, I don't care. I don't care what you say. I'm going to tell the truth.
I'm going to tell the truth. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, and that's just too bad. I mean, if the world don't like it, they don't like it. Sorry. So sorry. Right. But here's the thing. When you look at, I have one of my good friends is a pastor who ministered in Kenya for 26 years. And he just got remarried, and he remarried a Kenyan girl named Adelia. She is a beautiful person, both spiritually and in the flesh. I mean, she's just a beautiful person. And she has an intense spiritual faith. And her tribe has told her has said for thousands of years that they are of the house of Judah. They're of the house of Judah. Now, I also met a fellow from southern Kenya through this same ministry, through World Ministries International, who was a priest in a Levite community. Now, you could say, well, these guys aren't Levites, but they named themselves out of one of the sons of Gershon, and they have been practicing the sacrificial system without break for the last 3,000 years. So, okay, come on. You show me another group of people somewhere on earth that can say, we practice these traditions for 2,000 years or for 3,000 years. Now, I can tell you there are other groups. But this is the thing. When you talk about the house of Judah, you had several things take place.
Mhm.
One is this. You had, first there was a migration into Egypt that came with Abraham, right? That came with Israel. And his tribes all moved in. The 70 people moved into Israel and they became millions. Well, not everybody left. A lot of those people went down the Nile River Valley and they kept going down. And so there were many tribes that populated down the Nile River Valley into Ethiopia, down into Kenya, Tanzania, that area, even as far as South Africa. And you had the tribe of Judah, you had the tribe of Levi, and some remnant of Benjamin. Although, Benjamin was almost eradicated from that group.
Mhm.
And then there was the tribe of Dan. Now, Dan, look, Dan, is a very rogue group.
Mhm.
Dan, the tribe of Dan. They became the Nordic Vikings. But the tribe of Dan also came around, it's closer from Africa to South America than it is from Israel to the Straits of Gibraltar by ocean vessel.
Mhm.
And the tribe of Dan came around and they had a regular shipping port in what is now modern day Nigeria. So in Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and in that area, right in that area, that pocket of Africa, there was a great deal of the tribe of Dan present. Now they knew that they were inordinate to the other indigenous tribes that were there. And I have talked with other Nigerians who've grown up in Nigeria. They knew that there was this weird tribe that was living there. And that was the tribe that they often sold into slavery. They sold that tribe into slavery. They sold the tribe of Judah into slavery. They sold the tribe of Levi into slavery. This is who these tribes, they would collect these tribes and sell them into slavery. Now, this was a spiritual thing that was being done.
Mhm.
It was a spiritual thing that was being done. But of course, I also tend to agree with Malcolm X in respect of his view that many of the Aboriginal people in the Caribbean are misidentified as Africans when they weren't Africans at all. They were North Americans,
Right.
and they were indigenous to. But when you talk about indigenous in North America, what does that mean? That means they got here before somebody else did.
Right. Mhm.
And how did they get here? And who got here? Well, we know, for instance, I'll give you an example, that there is historical evidence from two different views, right? The Bible says that the first son of Issachar was Tula. The Mayan tradition says that the Mayan race was founded by a guy named Tula, right? So, I mean, you put two and two together, but the Mayans and the Cherokees, right, appear to be the house of Issachar. But when you talk about, and not all of the house of Judah is in Africa, okay?
Right.
I personally believe that the true Jews in Israel are the people that call themselves the Druze people. And the Druze people are not interested in recruiting anybody. In fact, they'll tell you point blank, you can't join the Druze. We don't proselytize to anybody. You have to have a father who was a Druze and a mother who was a Druze to be Druze. And they've lived, guess where? Mount Carmel, forever and ever.
Wow.
Right. And so, so when you talk about when you say, okay, well, how do we prove who the Jews are? Well, it's difficult, but it seems to me that if somebody has been holding themselves out as the house of Yehuda for 2,500 years, you could probably take their word for it.
Right.
Right. And so, so look, that doesn't mean that every African-American is of the house of Judah, or it doesn't mean that every African-American is Benjamite or is of the house of Dan, but many of them are. And, and so people who don't know who they are, there is another guy, there's a guy named Magid Ben Joseph who teaches at Hebrew University, who is an Apache. And he has demonstrated in scripture that the house of Manasseh came out of, the house of Manasseh were fearsome warriors, right? And so it's very likely that the Mongolian people are the house of Manasseh. They came from a tribe called the Massagetae. The Massagetae were a renamed form of the house of Manasseh because they took Manasseh and they said, we don't want you guys around here at all. We don't want you in Iran, in Persia. We don't want you in Assyria. We want you guys out of here. They took them and they moved them out to Afghanistan. and they became fearsome warriors in Afghanistan, and they kept moving and migrating, right? Like it says in Zechariah 4, it talks about the spotted horse, right? The spotted horse that went to and fro throughout the earth. This was a migration where people would leave, and they kept migrating. They migrated into Alaska using boats, not the land bridge. Okay, that old story. They crossed on the land bridge. No, they didn't. Look, if you live up here, you know nobody crossed on the land bridge. That area in Siberia is so hostile, so cold, and so brutal. Nobody crossed that way. Much easier to cross on a boat, right? Go with your buddies who are going salmon fishing. Look, this is how it happens. Okay, you take somebody and you form a village. Okay, so you form a village, and there's always one guy that's got to have power over everybody else, right? I'm in control here. I've got this fundamental need to control you. You should think like I do because I think better than you do. I got to control you. And they keep turning up the heat, right? Well, how are you going to control me? Well, you need to pay tribute to me. Okay. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to tax you. I'm going to send my guy over. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to burn your house down. I'm going to do, well, that's not working. Okay. I got a plan. How about we start randomly selecting your kids for slaughter? Oh, man. You pay me now, right? And they all get to that. Eventually, they all get to, we're going to pick some kids at random and slaughter them in order to put ultimate terror in the lives of people. So what happens? You're in a fishing group, right? Well, we got a fishing camp over here on this island. We go there and fish in the summer, and then we come back and we fish in the summer. And eventually, you get to the point where you say, if I don't come back, I don't have to listen to that guy. So they form a village, right? Yes. And that's how it happened. Well, so the House of Menashe, right? I believe that the Athabascan tribe in Alaska is Menashe, the Tlingit tribe in southeastern Alaska, Menashe, the Arapaho, the Apache, the Navajo, they're all Menashe. They're all Menashe. The native tribes that are along the St. Lawrence waterway. We met this gal in Israel. She was Iroquois from Canada. Wow. And she said she came to Israel and she was singing ancient Iroquois songs that her grandmother had taught her, and the rabbis understood every word. Wow. Said, how is it you understand every word? Because you're singing Hebrew, right?
And so good insight. Thank you for this, because a lot of people don't hear this and know this type of privy information that you're sharing right now. So everybody definitely take notes, suck it in, and go ahead, Doc.
Well, I mean, look, when you talk about the African-American community, I mean, you're talking about, first of all, you're talking about a rich heritage here, And it's so important because, look, when you read the Dred Scott decision, right? You got the Justice Taney there saying that the African-American is 2/3 human or 3/4 human, 3/5 human. I forget what the equation is, but it's still written that way in the U.S. Constitution, even though they line through it, right? In the first Article 1, it's written that way. And I'll tell you something, that has always been anathema to me. That has always been anathema. That has always been, you can't sit here and say that human being right there, who is flesh and blood, got the same, many of them have the same blood type I do. You're going to sit there and try to tell me that person is less human than me? That's a bunch of bull. It's a bunch of bull. And I wasn't going to listen to it. I didn't want to hear it. Don't want to know it. Didn't want to hear it. But that's what Taney said, and to justify you, when you say another human being is less than human, you justify killing them, you justify enslaving them, right? And this is a big problem for me because in the Torah, you have a command that says, okay, you cannot enslave your brother. He can be a bondservant, but after 7 years, you have to let him go. However, right, what's it say in the Torah? If you found him a wife and she has kids, at the end of 7 years, he can go, but you keep the wife and kids.
That's right.
Well, wait a minute. That's my wife and kids. Well, I guess you're not leaving, are you? So here,
right.
Punch the other ear, right? Let's punch the other ear. And, but then it says those who are not your brother can be chattel property owned that your kids can inherit. And this is what the slave owners used to say, okay, well, these African-Americans aren't our brothers. Well, they were wrong. Yeah. They didn't know. And it's like when they came in, we're going to go kill the Sioux Indians, and we're going to go kill the Cherokee. We're going to steal the land from the Cherokee and force them to go out to Oklahoma. Hey, those are your brothers. You can't do that to them. They're part of the House of Israel, right? And they had no idea. And anyway, but and it's not just the House of Israel, but you look inside the community. You go back and look at the history of the African American community and how many of them walked into the faith, right? How many of them the faith was central, core? It defined the community. It defined the community. It wasn't Islam that defined the community. It was the faith of Mashiach that defined the community.
That's say that one more time, Doc. It wasn't no Islam. It wasn't Islam that defined the community. I don't know where they get this stuff from.
You know, and Islam, if you want to talk about racist doctrine, you ought to read the Quran, man. That thing is totally racist. It is totally racist. And, you know, so, I mean, look, you know, not to jump down the throat of anybody, Islamic person, right? But I'm just saying that you go back and you look in the deep South, man, what the community was. They said you can't read. Guess what? The community found a way to read what? The Bible. That's what they found a way to read. And that was the thing that led the people out of slavery, because you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free.
That's right.
That's right. And, you know, so inside the community, and, you know, and of course, you know, I come from an Irish background, you know, on one side of my family. Let me tell you, the Irish, man, you want to talk about suffering, man. Man, I'm telling you, you know, it's like, you know, the Irish, you know, and it doesn't equate to guys coming in ships and chains, you know, that half of them would die. But I'll tell you, the Irish, they had 3 genocides perpetrated against them by the British, right? I mean, when Henry VIII came over and said, you Catholics, we're not Catholic anymore. And the Irish are like, well, we're Catholic. Okay, burn all their churches. Burn all their abbeys, you know, their universities, right? Burn all their abbeys, burn them down, burn all their churches. Then they imposed, in 1535, they imposed a restriction and said, you cannot record a Catholic birth, a Catholic death, or a Catholic wedding, or a Catholic baptism. They cannot be recorded, banned. That emancipation didn't happen until 1834. So from 1535, for 300 years, you could not record the death, the birth, the marriage, or the baptism of a Catholic in Ireland.
Wow. Wow.
Then Oliver Cromwell came in this mid 1600s and just butchered Catholics like there was no tomorrow. I mean, he was just a, you know, human slaughterer, and he imposed Protestantism on the entire island, and any Catholic that opened their mouth was executed, and their property was taken, and they were, you know, kicked off. So you had all these Irish ended up in the mid about 1650. They all ended up as renters, renting from British landowners that Cromwell had given their property to. And it was those British landowners in the 1847 that decided to ship all their food to Britain and leave no food for the Irish. And so you had 1.5 million die in a famine, and another 1.5 million left on famine ships. And about 25% of them died during the voyage trying to get to North America. But between that period of time, the Irish were routinely sold into slavery. Now, the Irish right now will deny it. Well, we were never sold into slavery. Oh, you most certainly were. And it was, and many of them were sold as bond servants, right? Well, you know, we'll pay for your trip to North America, but you have to pay me back once you get here, you know, working for me at the coal mine, or, you know, and most of it was coal mining. And so West Virginia was populated with these Irish guys who came over as bond servants. They never, ever did they get free, not ever. And Canada had the same thing going on. In fact, my 5th great grandfather came over as a bond servant to work a coal mine in Quebec, right? He was a bond servant, and it took him 10 years to be able to get his wife to come back and join him in Canada. But when you see that kind of thing, it was very common for these guys to be sold into bond slavery. Then here in Ireland, and what do you do with the women? Well, we don't care about the women. Sell them. So they were trafficking in Irish women, and they would dump the Irish women into the Caribbean.
Wow.
And these Irish women would come into the Caribbean, and they would be used as breed moms. And so they would take the Irish women and they would breed them with African slaves who were from the House of Judah. And by the way, the Irish are also from the House of Judah, different tribe. They're from the House of Judah. And they would breed them with African slaves because you had to pay money for a slave. But if you owned an Irish girl and she could give you 8 kids, now you got 8 slaves for free.
Wow.
Right? And so this is what they did. They did this for 200 years. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody on earth wants to talk about this. And, you know, right now we have the granddaughter of a Jamaican slave owner who owned 200 slaves, who is sitting in the office of the vice presidency of the United States.
Well, they ain't talking about that. They ain't put that out there. They didn't let everybody know that. But I want
Let me
to
take that back. I want to be politically correct here. Just a minute.
So I want to shift to one more video, and I think this video is something that all believers have dealt with going through, especially against those who are from the Protestant perspective. And this was a powerful short video of something you were teaching about that I think is very important. And this is one of the videos I wanted to share. So let's get into this next video as well. Let's see, where am I? All right. All right, should be able to see you see my black screen?
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay.
2, 3, and.
What I say to the dispensationalist is every tribe, tongue, and nation. And it's so funny how, you have a Jewish dispensationalism too, in addition to a Christian dispensationalism. There's really two camps there. And in my opinion, neither one of them are correct. And so when you try to breach the dispensationalist doctrine, which I find the dispensationalist doctrine, again, you're talking about people who they're in the spin cycle where they're using Paul to spin scripture. Now, when you have a situation, one of the things I like to ask them is, well, let me ask you this. Who is your Messiah? I mean, did Paul die on the cross? Or did Mashiach die on the cross? Who is your Messiah? So why do you say to me, if I say to you, the gospel say this, and then your response is, well, Paul said in Galatians, or Paul said in Ephesians, or Paul said in Romans. If that's your response, why are you asking me to filter the words of the Messiah through Paul when Paul is not the one who died? That's question number one. But of course, the spin doctrine is so severe. I mean, you're right, theology is very, very, very deep. But I can tell you that what I have found works the best when you're trying to reach through that void, which is dispensationalism, is to talk, and this is where I spend most of my discussion points, is on Sabbath. I talk about the Sabbath, and I talk about the feast days. Because you can't find, when you start looking around, you'd find the word Christmas in the Bible. I double dog dare you, you're not going to find it. And the word Easter that appears in the King James Bible, again, was a capitulation to the Council of Nicaea, which, and if you read those canons, it's obvious. We are going to impose the Holy Easter on this faith. And it's ironic that Constantine himself, who, by the way, didn't confess until his deathbed, that he got sick on Easter Day and he died on Shavuot. Ironic, isn't it? That he would take away the true holy feast, the Moedim of Yah. And so when you talk to a dispensationalist, like I've talked to a number of my former friends, and they're not former to me, but I'm former to them because, I'm anathema to them now. But I talked to them and I said, I was traveling one, and this guy says, I'm so wound up. My life is just like, I'm wound up like a bad watch. I don't have any time off. I'm going crazy. I said, you are the leader in a church. You need to consider and begin to practice Shabbat. And he looked at me and said, do you really take the day off? And I said, yes, I take the day off. I spend the day, actually I was beginning Friday evening. I spend the evening with Yah. We begin with a Shabbat meal when our friends gather with us on Friday night. And we sing in Hebrew and we share the bread and the cup. And we pray and we talk about things. And most of the time we don't wrap it up until midnight or 1. But even so, I spend Friday evenings and Saturday in the Word, in my prayer, in my time that I can spend with other believers and discussing the things of Yah. And I don't do the other stuff.
And so this is what's so important. And it's not a question of how far can I walk and whether or not I can start a fire. It's a question of whether or not you are resting in Yah or not. And so I would encourage you, when you try to show people about the roots, that if people come to understand what is being taught in Leviticus 23 and what the fourth commandment is, if they can begin to see that, the rest will start to open to them. The rest will start to unfold like a flower unfolding. That's the best way to challenge it. If you come at it and you say, well, I'm a, post-trib rapturist, and I disagree with your, philosophy in terms of how you believe who is Israel, you'll be arguing over the hyper-Calvinist doctrine of double predestination.
All right. All right. That was awesome there. All right. So, oh man, oh man, well, I tell you, where to start here. So, I mean, I thought that we kind of deal with this, but it seems as though, you've experienced it too. It's but Mashiach says this, but then someone says, well, Paul says this. Then it becomes a seesaw back and forth between what seems to be, and some of the Christian brothers say, well, I'm not putting Paul over Mashiach, but that's what it sounds like. And then it comes back with, well, the reason why this, because he was born under the law, as though Paul himself wasn't a Pharisee of Pharisees under the law as well, so it becomes those type of things. But go ahead, Dr. Elaborate.
Well, I got to tell you, I love the teaching of Paul. Okay. And we, when we published the Cepher, we published every word that Paul wrote, right? Including the 29th chapter of Acts. But when you talk about Paul, and you talk about, when I went and started looking at the Greek, I'm looking at the Greek going, hey, wait a minute. That isn't what he was saying there at all. You read it in English, it's like, what? And then you read the Greek and it's like, no, that isn't right. And of course, Greek is a difficult language. Mm-hmm. It's more difficult than Hebrew, because with Hebrew, you have a word, right? There's no compound word really in Hebrew. You have the idea of prefixes and suffixes to a Hebrew word, but you have the Hebrew root, and then you've got the prefixes and the suffixes and telling you what that word is. But in Greek, you got combination words. When you have the word apostasy, you have apo married with stasis. Those two words come together to create the word apostasy. You have many words like this in Greek. And so you have this, when you look at a Greek word, you might think that it means this, but when you start looking at its fundamental roots, you can go 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5, 6 words deep before you actually find what the word is based upon to tell you that what the word actually means, right? Mm-hmm. Now, also you get this idea. See, I don't believe that Paul was a Greek speaker. Mm-hmm. When you look at what he did when he defended himself in Israel, first of all, his conversion takes place on the road to Damascus. And when he gets knocked down, what language did the Mashiach use to speak to him? It tells you point blank. Mm-hmm. He spoke to him in the Hebrew tongue.
That's what it says. And
it was heard. Now, no one else saw him, but everyone else heard him speak to him in Hebrew. When Paul got jacked up in front of the Sanhedrin, he was putting on trial, right? Mm-hmm. The guys say, we're not going to eat or drink again until that guy is dead. And so he flees and he runs to Caesarea. Well, hey, hold on here. Nero, I'm a Roman. Hello, And so they put him under house arrest. And when it comes time to defend himself, he stands up and defends himself in Hebrew. Okay, now, let's say that you're taken down to Mexico City, Maury, okay? Mm-hmm. And somebody accuses you of murder and you're facing the death penalty. Are you going to stand up in court and defend yourself in Spanish? No, you're not going to do it, man. You're going to speak your native tongue. Get an interpreter in here. I'm speaking my native tongue because I want to make sure you get my story, right?
Right.
Well, it's the same thing here. He was speaking in his native tongue. He was speaking in Hebrew. So when you look at the text of Paul, you'll see all over the place. The King James writers and the 1560 Geneva writers will tell you, oh, this was written by Tychicus, or this was written by Timothy, or, or or this was written by what was his name, Philemon, or whatever his name, Onesimus, right? And that he tells you over and over, this book was written by so and so, because what was happening was this, and this is really the truth of what happened in the first century. Mashiach picks a bunch of disciples who don't write. They don't write, right? Mm-hmm. And why? Because the doctrine was at that time, and this was the true teaching, and this is a very important point. Yah is living. Yahusha is alive. Mm-hmm. Yah is living. The written word is dead. When you put it on the page, that's what it is. It's not going to morph into another word. It's not going to change. It's not going to grow. Right. You can't put water on it and it flowers. What it is what it is, right? It's like on a tombstone. Those words on the tombstone, that's it. That's what's on the tombstone. But with Mashiach, you have a living Yah, right? And so the practice was, we're going to tell the stories of Mashiach. We tell them. It's just like it's given in Deuteronomy. Teach your children this. Say it to them. Put it on your doorpost, but teach them. Say it to them. You know, when you sit down at the dinner table and mom starts telling you, oh, I remember the time when Uncle Joe was such a bad actor, when he stole that guy's car, then he flattened the tires, and then he got caught and he had to do 90 days in jail. And when he got out, and then pretty soon she's told the story so many times, you can tell it, right? We know the story. We don't need to hear it from you anymore, right? But you do need to hear it, because those stories are told over and over and over and over again, so that they're passed from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly how the gospel came down. That's why you hear the parables. The parable was this. He told this. He said that. He said that. And all of these parables were being passed on. All this stuff was being passed by word of mouth, and it was going throughout the entire community. Well, John Mark, who I think was the son of Peter, I think it was his son. John Mark, when he got to Alexandria, well, it wasn't Alexandria. It was the city that we now call Cairo. But at that time, it was called Fortress Babylon. It's called Fortress Babylon in Egypt. And this is where Peter went with John Mark. And they were down there in a round church. And John Mark is the one who scripted this Gospel of Mark, right? The first kind of reduction of the stories. And Matthew was being created back in Israel. But Matthew was ultimately scribed into the Greek, right? And they burned the Hebrew. Now, this was Constantine who burned the Hebrew. They got rid of the Hebrew because Constantine wanted to declare that the world was Greek. Constantine himself was born in York, England, and his wife Helen was born in York, England. And they came back to form Constantinople because of the history of the Trojan War. They wanted to recreate Troy. That's why they went back there. And so then they wanted to dominate the world with this Greek center, that Greece would be the dominating force in the world. Now, you got to remember, they enshrined this and kept it in place until 1453. They outsurvived Western Rome by 1,000 years. And so he had a whole methodology that he was using. And this is why they wanted to put the New Testament in the Greek language. So it was scribed. Paul would say, this is what I mean, blah, 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 blah. And he was an extremely in-depth, sophisticated, very complicated rabbi. And they're like, what did he say? Oh, he's talking about the law. Well, in Hebrew, is he talking about the Hokot? Is he talking about the Mishpatim? Is he talking about the mitzvot? What law is he talking about? Is he talking about commandments, statutes, judgments? Oh, no, we got the word for it, nomos. Nomos, that's it. Nomos, he said that, so just use nomos. So they put in nomos. So you got two words that are like totally vague. One is nomos, and the other one is autos. So when you look at autos, right? When you look at John 1:1, in the beginning was the word was with Elohim, the word was Elohim, he was with Elohim, the King James says the same was with Elohim in the beginning. The same. Mm-hmm. Why does it say the same? Because you have the word autos. Well, autos, what's that? Doesn't that mean he? Yeah, but it also means she, and it also means it, and it also means they, and it means them, and it means itself, herself, himself, themself. Same word, right? So are you talking male or female? Are you talking neuter? What are you talking? Right? So King James authors said, well, we don't know what it is, so put the same, right? Whatever it was that they were talking about there, the same applies here. So this ambiguity is the same in nomos. So you have these Greek writers trying to fit Paul into a thing. So we know, for instance, when Paul says that if a woman is married to a man and he divorces her and another man marries her, that she's an adulteress. Now, they use the word nomos. Okay, so does that mean Torah? That the whole Torah is expressed in that? No, that's a single mitzvah. That's a single mitzvah. It's a single statute he's referring to there. Or when you look at in the book of Hebrews, when they talk about the ordinances of the Levites, right? It's a different word there. It's nomos does not carefully describe it. And so with all of this thing, on one hand, he's talking about the law. On the other hand, he's talking about the Torah. On the other hand, he's talking about a law. On the other hand, he's talking about a statute. On the other place, he's talking about a judgment. But the Greek writers didn't get it. And so they just blah, 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 blah. Clink. And when you look at the Greek, when you compare the early writings of Paul in the Greek, they're clunky. They're very, very clunky compared to Hebrews, which is not clunky at all. It's eloquent. It's very well written book, very well written. So when I look at all these things and okay, well, people use Paul. Well, first of all, Paul isn't correctly interpreted in most English Bibles. And in fact, in many English Bibles, they have intentionally distorted Paul in order to teach lawlessness. Now, here's the problem. When you go into a church, I mean, I can show you a billion. First, let's take the NIV, okay? Mm-hmm. Not to criticize, I don't normally do this, okay? But the NIV, like a number of other books, like the ESV, like the NASB, like the ASB, they were predicated and built upon the Westcott and Hort text. Westcott and Hort relied upon the Codex Sinaiticus to build their text, which they came out and touted in the 1860s. We found the oldest, most authentic text there is, the Codex Sinaiticus. And they came out and published that. And immediately thereafter, this guy, Shimon, whatever his name was, published for 3 years in the London Times. No, I wrote it. I wrote the Codex Sinaiticus. I was writing it for the Tsar, and I didn't do a very good job of it. That's why you found it in the trash can, because I threw it out. I wasn't going to give it to the Tsar, right? I wrote it. And Westcott and Hort are like, that guy's a liar. Or we found it and it's an authentic text, right? But they also produced a forgery, Westcott and Hort, of the minutes of the Council of Laodicea. It was the 19th set of the minutes of Laodicea that claimed that 66 books were canonized at the Council of Laodicea. They were the only ones that had a copy of those so-called minutes, the only ones. All the other 18 extant copies of those minutes did not include any canonization of 66 books. The books were not reduced to 66 books until they were never reduced to 66 books. The first time the Bible was canonized was in 1256 at the Council of Trent, and it was included the Apocrypha. That's why the King James included the Apocrypha, the 1560 Geneva included the Apocrypha, the 1535 Coverdale included the Apocrypha, the 1789 Benjamin Blaney edition of the KJV included the Apocrypha. It was only with the Scrivener edition of the KJV in the 1880s that they eliminated the Apocrypha because they could sell more books with less pages.
Wow.
And so anyway, so here's what you see. So when you're talking about Paul, when you look at Paul, so people will say, well, Paul came in his own name. Well, actually, no, Paul wasn't even his name. That was somebody Greekifying his name. He was telling you, I'm a tent maker, Paul Ohel. What do? I'm a tent maker, Paul Ohel. What's Paul? Paul means worker. He's telling you. So when you see this opening thing, they glorify, I, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, come to you now, blah, 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 right? Grace and peace in the name of Jesus Christ. And v'shalom b'Hashem Yahshua HaMashiach, right? In the Hebrew, right? But when he's telling you, I, Paul, I, the worker. And that's why in the Cepher, it's Paal, Paul, the worker. I'm the worker. And you look when he says, what does he say? The Protestant work ethic, right? Those who don't work shall not eat. And he talks to Timothy, do your work, do your work, do your work. He's forever and he worked the whole time when he was in his ministry. He'd go to a place and he'd sew tents. He'd sew tents when he got there, and he'd make these tents, and that's how he made his living. And he did that everywhere he went. He was a tent maker. That's why he wasn't in there coming there in his own name. He came there as the worker, right? And an apostle, the sent one. So if you take out all these glorification that you get, and these guys want to capitalize, oh, he was a capital A, bold font, 24-point bold font, capital A, apostle. Well, it's like here, I'll give you another one. You walk in a Christian church. Well, are you Jewish? Oh, no, I'm Gentile. Oh, those are the options. Eh? Those are the two options that we get here. And the fact is, look, why is it that you claim that the New Testament is in Greek and then you use this Latin word Gentile? Why do you do that? Wait, what are you thinking, right? Is there like Roman programming going on here or what, right? The truth is the word there that you find in the Greek is ethnos. And ethnos translate as nations, just like goyim, right? If you put if I say, oh, you're goyim, what does that mean? That means you're of another nation. You're of a different nation, right? Goyim. But if I put a capital G on it, now let's capitalize that word. Let's put a capital G there and bold it. Goyim. Oh, those guys. The goyim. Oh. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, I'll give you another example. Melchizedek, right? So some interpreter, Melchizedek, that's with a capital M, right? Melchizedek, it's not two distinct words describing something, and there's no capital letters in the Hebrew, but we're going to capitalize it, capital M, right? Melchizedek. Well, Melchizedek, right? You see Tzedek all over scriptures. Like we were talking about it last night on Crossing Over, we were talking about the idea of doing righteous judgment, right? And having a righteous measure and a righteous ephod. So you're going to have a righteous ephah. So it's ephah tzedek. If you're going to have a righteous hin, it's hin tzedek. If you're going to have a righteous king, it would be melech tzedek. Melech tzedek, a righteous king, right? Melech tzedek is my righteous king. My righteous king, Melech tzedek. Oh, Melchizedek, that's with a capital M. That's a guy, right? That's a capital proper noun. Once you do that, you start distorting scripture like you would not believe. So goyim with a capital G, Gentile with a capital G. When it's not there, it's not there. It's not there. So when you start clearing up some of these ridiculous concepts that people have about Paul, and the problem is you come out of certain churches, and I'm not going to say all the Baptist churches or all the Pentecostal churches or all the Methodist churches, but you get churches that glorify Paul, and they sit here and they pull up the NIV, a book predicated on a forged codex that eliminates at least 18 critical prophecies of establishing the deity of Mashiach, and that has errors all over the place that I can point out to you with no difficulty. And the preacher's up there taking that NIV and he's thumping it in your face. This is the inerrant word of God. And then he gets out a crescent wrench and he looks at that word the, comparing it to the word in Daniel 9:27. And he's like, we're going to wrench all of the juice out of that word the, right? And it doesn't appear in the Hebrew at all. It doesn't even exist in the Hebrew. But you got your English interpretation, bad interpretation, that's based upon a forgery, and you got your crescent wrench out there, and you're going to work over that word, that English word, until you get everybody in the place in the audience agreeing with you that the only immutable law that was never nailed to the cross was the tithe, which, as you know, is the gospel message in most evangelical churches.
Wow. So at this point, I know, man, I really appreciate you. Thank you for coming on, Dr. Pidgeon. I'm going to open up for a couple of more seconds here, and I guess a couple more minutes here. And if anyone has any questions within here on the live for Dr. Pidgeon, right now I'm gonna try to get to most of them if I can through here. I would just simply ask you to put a Q and maybe a colon or semicolon, and then put your question. So that way, because I know people are putting comments, I want to distinguish the difference between the questions and just general comments. So if you have a couple, I want to kind of go and ask. I know I saw people putting them in earlier, but I didn't want to go through it. And also people have to understand too, I want y'all to really, really understand. I said several times, this is an interview. So we would like to do it properly, or an interview and whatnot. So ask questions that would pertain to the subject matter, what's going on, or any statements or things like that. All right. So when you get ready, when you ask them, put them in the comments, and we're ready now. You have a few more minutes here before we let Dr. Pidgeon go. Once again, Dr. Pidgeon, I thank you for coming on. You shared a lot, and that's what I wanted. I wanted, I don't like the just the whole boring interview where it just seems so structured and, it's things like that, just one after the other. I like it to be free flowing and, you have at liberty of, switching gears of subjects within a subject. So that's fine. I think it was a great interview. I really appreciate you coming on here. The first question is my cousin, We Woke Now. He asked, he said, what is your thoughts on the two books of Jasher?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, the first book of Jasher, which was published just prior to the book of Jasher we're using, is actually called Pseudo Jasher, and it was a forgery. And that fellow actually went to jail for forging that particular book. The book Jasher that we use, we have on the Cepher website. You can get a download of the Hebrew extant text for that book. And it has been verified as correctly interpreted in the 1880s. And he tried to publish it in Britain, but he couldn't because of the pseudo Jasher that had been published first, and which was the forged Jasher. This book, we believe, is the real Jasher. We believe this was the book that was sequestered out of Jerusalem when the temple was being burned in 70 AD and taken to Sevilla, Spain, where it was kept and eventually published in the 1400s in the Hebrew language and then interpreted into English in the 1880s. And there's lots of, we have, if you download the preface, in fact, if you go to the Cepher website and you check out what is the Cepher, I have a video up where I actually go through the preface of the Cepher and I talk in depth about the validity of the book of Jasher and why we included it. And it really is quite something else. And that text is, by the way, Jasher has so much information in it. It's a huge book, but there's some information in Jasher that has yet to be completely revealed, talking about the location of the house of Yafet and its geography and what happens with this fellow named Zepho at the end of the book, because we see there's like some competing places where we see this guy Zephon and Zepho in different texts. But in Jasher, it refers to him as Zepho. In some of the texts, like 2 Kings or something, it's referred to as Zephon. And this particular king, what he did in Egypt, is going to, ultimately, that stuff is going to be revealed, and there's going to be some things revealed. I mean, let me just share this with you. And I want to share this with you before we go, Amari.
Mm-hmm.
There is this thing in creation that is called phi. And phi is it's based on the Fibonacci sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you chart it out, it kind of looks like a self-similar spiral like this, right? Well, if you place phi down, there's a place in the world where phi becomes very obvious geographically, and that place is Africa. And so you have this self-similar spiral that comes out like this, and it basically fits perfectly in the continent of Africa. It gives you an idea that, in fact, the Garden of Eden, the very center of creation, was probably just north of Nigeria in what is now the Sahara Desert. And I firmly believe that when the angel closed the Garden of Eden and, you put up a flaming sword, that flaming sword is really all of that desert sand in Sahara. Now, they've recently discovered that there are two of the largest lakes in the world underneath that sand, and a huge river that runs all the way across North Africa and comes out in Gambia, a huge river. And that when Yah chooses to reveal that to his people, that sand will just get moved and placed somewhere else. And here is going to be this pristine land of milk and honey, this absolute beautiful, fabulous paradise on earth that will have no garbage dumps, no pollution, no septic tanks, no nothing, just pure water and pure paradise. And so I wanted to share that with you. So, and anyway, so the book of Jasher talks a lot about that geography. And so we do think that the book of Jasher in the Cepher is an accurate and historical text that is meritorious of being printed and being included in the selection.
Okay, awesome. The next question was, we were having a conversation about the Irish, and I know you were talking about the mixing between the those who of House of Judah and in the Caribbean, And then you made mention of, so Big Red asked a question about the Irish, and he was asking a question about how the Irish descendants of Judah.
Oh, well, there were two houses in the house of Judah. There was the house of Perez and the house of Zerach. Zerach was the one, when the twins were born, a hand came out, and the midwives put a red ribbon around the hand. And then the hand, so that hand broke the matrix. Then the hand withdrew, and Perez came out, was born. But with no red ribbon on his hand. Zerach is technically the firstborn, but Perez came out first. Now, Mashiach, according to Matthew 1, is in the line of Perez. Zerach, on the other hand, is an extremely interesting house because the sons of Zerach, which are only described in 2 Chronicles, those sons, Calcol is the one who formed the city of Athens. Darda is the one who formed the city of Troy. Etanim is the one who formed the city of Cadiz, Spain. Mm-hmm. And Zimri is the only one that retained in the house. So Calcol's son was a son named Galathus, who came back into Egypt and eventually migrated. And his tribe, the tribe of Galathus, migrated from Egypt through Libya, through Morocco, into Spain. And there was an area called Lusitania, which was the Atlantic seacoast. And they resided there for a while. And that eventually became called the Port of Galathus, or Portugal. The Port of Galathus, Portugal. And these Gauls would be in Portugal, northern Spain, western France. And then they migrated into Ireland and into Scotland and into Wales. And they were called the Gaelic people, not Gauls, but Gaelic in Ireland and Scotland. And so the Gaelic people in Ireland, Scotland, and in Wales are of the house of Zerach, the house of Judah. Perez was a different house that went into Israel, that went down into Yemen, that went into Ethiopia, that went into Somalia, into Kenya. And that was all the house of Perez. And they also were pulled out into Babylon. And so there's many of the house of Judah that are living in Iran right now, for instance, and in Iraq.
Yeah, it's interesting because every time we have a conversation, when I have a conversation with any scholar or PhD or whatnot, the conversation always goes in some way about Portugal, Spain, and now they're finding out there's a lot of people, there's a lot of quote unquote Black Jews who are in the Caribbean by the way of Spain, yes.
By the way of Spain, that is a fact too, and now that is that's a whole different deal, right? But
right.
When you talk about the Moors, so when you look at that whole area, Libya, there's no question that Libya, Tunisia, Morocco were full of all the members of the house of Israel. You're not just talking about Jews. You're talking about Ephraim. You're talking about Dan. You're talking about Issachar. You're talking about Zebulun. You're talking about Asher. All of those guys were present in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Libya. With the Carthaginian Empire was built by the house of Israel. Not all 12 tribes were there, but many of them were there. And many of the 12 tribes were in Cadiz. So when you talk about, when you go to Morocco, you see African people in Morocco, and many of those Moors were also in Spain. And it wasn't until the Pope decided, well, we got to get rid of those people, right?
Wow. Yeah,
that's the Pope is kind of myopic.
We have a matter of fact, I'm gonna send you a documentary for you to check out. And then also there's another documentary coming out that kind of deals with that as well. So called Reclaiming the Throne. I'm going to send you those documentaries for you to definitely check out. I think it'll be something that you would definitely appreciate and take a liking to, especially since you're a non-politically correct individual. So let's see here. Let me see if any more questions here. I saw a couple. Most people are just like commenting on some like information and things that you're saying. Let's see. I want to make sure I try to get to something before we get out of here.
Well, you know what's cool about the Jews who were kicked out of Spain, right? You know, Columbus himself was Jewish, right? Cristobal Colon. And so here he is. So here it is on the 9th of Av in 1492. And Ferdinand and Isabella, who were also Jews, they're okay. Look, you Jews have to get out. You know, no Jews allowed in Spain anymore. And so Christopher Columbus was like, okay, well, I got 3 boats. And so he filled up 3 boats full of Jews, right? Spanish Jews. And so they all come to the New World. Well, a bunch of them, inhabited, Cuba and the Dominican Republic, I forget what they're called, Hispaniola. And so what happens, right? They become the first pirates. And so here's Spain. Let's go over to the New World and let's steal all their gold. So they come over and they're stealing Incan and Mayan and Aztec and gold. And they got to put it on the ships. They're headed back to Spain. Hey, remember us, the guys you kicked out?
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to get some of that cash back that you stole from us there when we left. Right. We're gonna need some of that back.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's see here. Does anybody else have any more questions? Oh, question. Let me see. Let's see here. Question. Greg Ashan asked a question. Says, how are all of these people from Israel from various ethnic group when Israel is a family, no DNA connection whatsoever? I hope I read the question right.
Yeah, I understand what his question is. Now, here's the thing about DNA. This is the beauty of DNA, right? Well, we know that the Jewish DNA is this. Oh, really? How do you know that? Well, we've compared it to so-and-so's DNA, and that's what we've concluded was Jewish DNA. Well, how do you know he had Jewish DNA? Well, he told us he did. Oh, okay. All right, I get it. So this guy who is alive here, when you started your DNA test, told you, I'm Jewish. And so you took his DNA and you put a J on it. And you said, okay, that's Jewish. That guy looks Jewish. He's got a yarmulke right there, and he's got some yidlocks. So I'm going to accept him as Jewish. And so he says he's Jewish. And so therefore, we'll put a J on that haplogroup. There, we now know who the Jews are.
Hey, they gonna do it. The Christians gonna do videos on me and you. The Ashkenazis gonna be mad. Rabbi Harry Rosenberg. Hey, listen, I know if you probably watching. Hey, you already know. I know you're not politically correct as well, Rabbi Harry Rosenberg. But I don't think you got Dr. Pidgeon. Dr. Pidgeon is off the chain. He
Well, let me say this to Rabbi Rosenberg. I heard that interview. I heard some of that interview, and it was a great interview. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he is.
And and the thing is, so when you talk about the DNA, but trying to establish DNA, the point I'm trying to make is this.
Right.
We don't have any DNA samples from David. We don't have any DNA samples from. Oh, we know this guy's Jewish. We got his DNA. Oh, do you? How do you know that? I mean, how do you know that? Oh, we found Nimrod's tomb, so we got Nimrod's DNA. Well, I mean, you might be able to find some DNA from some of those mummies they just produced that they just found there in Egypt, right? You might be able to pull some DNA out of that. But I'll tell you, in terms of trying to say that we've got identifiers that establish categorically that this is the Jewish haplogroup is a bunch of nonsense. It's just not true. And I can tell you, there was a roster published. We talk about the Jews being expelled from Spain, right? Mm-hmm. There was a roster published that said, okay, here's all the Jewish families that were expelled from Spain. And they had all the names, right? And it was, I don't know, some 4,000 family names that were laid out in this roster. And then Juan Carlos, the King of Spain, says, we did a lot of bad damage back during the Inquisition in 1492. We did a lot of bad stuff. So we want to reverse that. And we want to allow the Spanish Jews to come home, right? But before we do that, would somebody please delete any evidence of what those 4,000 names were? And then the roster we're going to use now is that you can come back to Spain as a Spanish Jew if you can get rabbi approval in Israel that you're in fact Jewish. Then you can come back to Spain. Not the families we burned at the stake in Mexico City. Not the families we burned at the stake in Spain for being Jewish. Not the ones that we used to gut and to steal their silver coins and the jewels that they swallowed when they got on the ship to Morocco. Not those families. We know who they are, but we don't want to see hide nor hair of them. No. You get some rabbis to identify you, then you can come back to Spain.
Wow. So one more question. I know it's we're 5 minutes before 1 o'clock on the East Coast time here. Let's see here. One more question. The question was okay. Your take on the Book of Enoch. Why is it called the Book of Enoch when everything was destroyed during the flood?
Yeah, well, not everything was destroyed during the flood.
Okay.
That's premise number one. And premise number two is that the book of Enoch, and again, we talk about this in the preface of the Cepher. The book of Enoch was accepted as scripture during the time of Mashiach. And there are two church fathers that say this. Tertullian is one of them, and Origen is the other. Origen is the one who compiled the Hexapla and the Septuagint. And both of them said that the book of Enoch is scripture. The book of Hanok or Enoch, there is a compilation of books, right? And I'm going to be teaching the book of Enoch here pretty quickly. And, so you have a passage by Methuselah, and you have a passage by Noah, and of course you have the initial passage by Enoch. And there may be some corruption in the book too, some Essene corruption in the book. Mm-hmm. But what you see is the Jasher details it, and Jubilees details it, that there were scrolls that were placed on the ark, and Shem had those scrolls. And even though Shem could speak Hebrew, the Hebrew language was destroyed at the time of Nimrod, but was restored to Abraham, and it was also restored to Joseph. And so this Hebrew language is not going away because the Hebrew language is self-evident. The Hebrew language is self-evident. We talked about with the Paleo and the Terushah, the Paleo. It's self-evident. Now, Latin is not self-evident. That's why it's going away. Hebrew is self-evident because it is the language of creation. And in its purest form, it will be restored. And people will understand it no matter how much goes on. You can burn every Hebrew book you want. You can kill every believer. And ultimately, the word of Yah will prevail.
Hallelujah. Well, that's definitely a way to go out. A great note to say that. Go ahead. If I know we gave out the information about Cepher.net. You guys don't forget to go in there and check out some stuff. Also, too, you can look up Dr. Stephen Pidgeon on YouTube. Go to his YouTube channel. And you can check out some more information on other teachings and things like that. Hey, once again, Dr. Pidgeon, thank you. I appreciate you coming on and look forward to once all of this is over, meeting you face to face personally, whichever way it goes or wherever it is. I don't know where. I've never been to Alaska. Would probably like to come to Alaska one day.
Well, on the 4th of July, if it doesn't rain, we barbecue. Okay, so it's But I'll tell you what, Maury, hey, thank you so much for having me. Blessings to you, blessings on Atlanta, a great city, a great place. And it's a place that has the light shining in it. And because the remnant is there, the fire is lit, and the remnant will stand strong. This wheat is going to grow, no matter how difficult the tares may be, the wheat is going to grow. And it is fantastic. The community is brothers and sisters from every tribe, every tongue, and every nation. We should never forget that. Never forget who your brothers and sisters are, right? Never forget who they are. Very, very important, right? Treat each other with love and respect, and then we will all grow in the kingdom together.
Hallelujah. Thank you. And then everybody, you're just now listening to Dr. Pidgeon, and we'll set up something at another time to come on and talk about some of his other lessons and things that he have coming in the future. All right. Shalom.